Hello, and welcome to Improbable Things. I'm J. Grace Pennington, and this is my podcast where I share 6 improbable thoughts before breakfast, which is 6 thoughts about reading, writing, or some storytelling in general. So I've got my 6 things ready, and let's get started. Number 1, yesterday I actually got my first beta reader feedback on Humanoid, the book that I'm about to start editing soon. So that was really exciting, and my reader, I haven't gone over all the feedback yet, but in the body of the email, the reader said they really enjoyed it and really liked all the twists and turns. So that was really good to hear, because it's so hard to get any kind of objective perspective on something that you've written. So it's hard for me to know if the plot and the twists and turns of the story are working at all or not. So that was great to hear. I'm also still reading it to my husband, which is going pretty slowly because the time I have to read to him is at night, and at night we are basically always both really tired. So some nights we're just like, oh, maybe another night. But thankfully I'm not in a big rush. But I would say we're close to halfway through with that read. And my husband said that the last couple chapters I read were really getting interesting. And he doesn't care for sci-fi, and especially not this kind of like Star Trek-ish variety. So when he can enjoy it, I always definitely feel like I've done my job. So anyway, making some slow but steady progress on that, and it's been so good to start hearing from some actual readers. Number 2, I broke 20,000 words on my current work in progress, Intoxication, which is awesome. So getting close to halfway through. I think yesterday I was a little bit past 21,000, and my goal is about 50,000. That's usually about how long the books tend to be. So I'm feeling good about that, even though it's been kind of difficult to do the writing, which I'll talk more about later, but also just difficult to fit it into my schedule, because while I can write really quickly, I usually don't, and I really struggle with putting it off. And so it's definitely sort of a mental battle every day to make the time and do it in a timely manner. And since I have a lot of other things going on too. So, but all that said, it is going well, and that's been just really nice to see progress being made. Number 3, I wanted to let y'all know that I finally got my newsletter up and running again. I've heard so many times from so many people that a newsletter really is the best and the number one way to do marketing and stay connected with readers, and just in my journey to try to promote my work more and do a little bit more focusing on the business side of things, I kept coming back to that was really the main thing I needed to work on, because it is a way to build really direct relationships with readers and with people who are interested in my projects. And so, yeah, I was just really overwhelmed at the idea. And so I had put it off for a while, and then I did get a newsletter going a few years ago, I think. But for one thing, it was connected to my website, which I had lost for a time, but also the service I was using for that was actually making it worse, because there was very little automation. So it was actually even more overwhelming. So I started it up the past few weeks, but I've kind of just been trying to make sure I can get it going, decide what I'm going to be doing with it, make sure I have all my welcome emails set up and all that sort of thing. So anyway, I have got it up and running, and I always my number one goal with it is that I want it to be something that subscribers can actually enjoy, because I don't like getting a lot of extra emails. Obviously, I don't think any of us do. And I do not enjoy newsletters that involve a whole lot of reading, because I just don't like to sit down and read long emails. And so I wanted it to be just really brief and things that I would find interesting if it was me. So generally all I do in each newsletter is I'll share a link to some recent post on my blog that I think people would enjoy. So it could be a review, could be an excerpt, or just, whatever. And then I share some kind of little fact. I'm kind of going back and forth. I was doing little tips about reading and writing, but I wasn't really feeling that, so I changed it to interesting facts about books and stuff like that. So I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with that section, but it's just some little like tiny interesting thing that you can read that's book or story related in some way or another. And then I always put just a tiny little blurb about what I'm currently reading, just because I do read so much. And so I read enough that I generally have something new to share about my reading each week, as you all know who listen to this podcast. So anyway, that's my newsletter. You can sign up at my website if you are interested. And currently my website is at jgracetheauthor.com. So just wanted to let you all know about that. Oh yes, I forgot. The other thing about it is that I set it up so that subscribers can get a copy of book 2 in the Firmament series in his image as a free download. So that was what people were saying that I should do. So we'll see how all this goes. I don't know what I'm doing at all, but it's been good to actually dive in and try to do what I can with it. The number 4, I will say this, it's kind of a stretch to relate this to reading or writing, but it is language related, so hopefully y'all will allow it. But so the girls, or my girls, their grandfather is a bit hard of hearing, and so some of the family have started saying like, oh, we should like learn sign language, in case it gets worse or whatever. And I have always been fascinated by sign language and loved it. I had a book when I was a kid about sign language, and I just thought it was so cool. And I do know the whole alphabet, although that's pretty much all. So technically I could say anything with sign language, it would just be really slow. But anyway, I've always been really interested in it. And last time we were at the library, I saw they had this whole section of kids' videos about sign language. And my girls love to get DVDs from the library to watch throughout the week. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun if we just start checking out one of those each week and we could watch it together? It could be like part of school. And we could all learn some sign language. And they are already really interested. Like sometimes if I sing them the ABC song, I'll do the alphabet signed, and then the few other things I do, like I know the signs to the song Jesus Loves Me, so I'll sign that when I sing to them and they'll try to copy it. So I think they would really enjoy it, and it could be really beneficial just in general, plus if we do end up needing it for their grandfather. So anyway, we'll see how that goes, but the videos looked like they were really cute, and like there was a lot of good stuff in there, so we might start doing that. So number 5, on my currently reading, I actually just finished Project Hail Mary, which I talked about last week. So since I had just begun it when I was talking about it before, I thought I would just revisit this one and give just like a little tiny update, because while I still do have some nitpicks about the writing for sure, I definitely liked it overall, and I do think I liked it more toward the end. And the very end even made me cry, which even though I cry in like every single movie that has ever been made, I don't cry that much in books for some reason. So he did a good job wrapping it up. And one of the problems I had with it is that I just didn't really like the main character that much. Like I didn't hate him, I just didn't really find him very appealing or very relatable throughout a lot of the book. And there were a couple things that happened toward the end that did help with that. So although it would have been nice if I could have felt that way for like the majority of the book as I'm following this character, it was nice that toward the end there were some things that I personally, some kind of interesting things. I'm not going to give examples because they're very spoilery, but some things that did make me feel that a little bit more connection to the character. He did a good job, like I said, with those things and wrapping up some of those storylines. So yeah, I enjoyed it. And I wouldn't recommend it for everyone because I feel like some people would definitely hate it because it is so sciencey. Like it's very, very, very sciencey. And I just loved that and found it super cool. Don't know how realistic the science is because I'm not a scientist, but it worked for me. And I'm sure that the author obviously knows a lot about science and put tons and tons of research into it. So I'm sure it's as realistic as it can be for science fiction, was my impression of it. But I really enjoyed that, but I'm sure some people would find it very boring. And then also, one of the things I didn't like about the book is I just have so many worldview differences with it, and that just from a practical reading standpoint, that kept tripping me up. Like there's so much about evolution in there constantly, and then just kind of some of the ways that people act in a crisis and things like that, I did not find very consistent with a worldview that tells us that the world has fallen and people are inherently sinful. Just when it comes to things like all the countries of the world working together and whatever, I was just like, I couldn't really buy it because I just like, yeah, no, there's no way. But so some of those things would trip me up, but it was still not too much for me to enjoy the story overall. So yeah, I liked it, and it's really very clean. Also, there's a little bit of language, but not as much as is normal for adult books. And he gave a really good reason for why the main character, who's really mostly the only character for most of the book, doesn't really swear very much. So I did appreciate that. And other than that, it's a couple little mentions of things, but it was really, especially for an adult book in this day and age, it was pretty clean. So I'm looking forward to tonight is actually my book club, so I've got a lot of baking to do today for that, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Number 6, this is something I have talked about many times, and I'm sure I've talked about it multiple times on this podcast already, so sorry to beat a dead horse, but I just have to come back to it again because it's so relevant to where I am right now on my project journey, and it's also just so relevant to writers everywhere and to artists in general. I think anyone that is involved in creative pursuits, but specifically when it comes to writers, just my philosophy of there being no writer's block. Like writer's block is a figment of people's imagination and an excuse basically not to write. So what's brought that to my mind is as I'm working on Intoxication, I mentioned I broke 20,000 words on it. And I keep thinking as I'm going that for someone who loves writing, it's really amazing how much I usually hate writing. And so much of this first draft and every first draft I've ever written is just like pulling teeth. Like it's miserable, like just slogging through it, and not the entire time. So there will be scenes that come up where I just love it and it just flows and it reminds me why I was drawn to this story in the first place, and it's great and it's wonderful, and I'm just like flying through my word count, and then it'll just grind to a halt again. And it's again just like, oh, this is horrible. And that's the majority of the time. Like that is the most of the writing I'm doing is that kind where it is not working. But I still do it. And I realized this early on in my journey as a writer because I was writing like ever since I was a very little kid, but I never finished anything because of this. Because I'd get all excited about a story and then very quickly would find that it was very difficult and not very enjoyable, and the inspiration was 100% gone, and I would abandon the project. Like that happened way too many times for me to count or remember. And the only way I've ever been able to finish a project, which obviously now I've finished several, is to just say no to that, to say no to the idea that I have to be inspired or that it has to be going well for me to get the words out and do the writing. And to just say I'm going to do it anyway, whether I like it or not. And again, the amount of time that I don't like it is just kind of insane sometimes. And I always tell people, honestly, like sometimes I love writing, but more often I mostly just love having written. Because I love the idea of writing and I love words. And like I said, there will be those times that it's just wonderful and glorious and it's just going amazingly well and I'm loving it and oh, this is so good, and it just like gets me right there and all this stuff. But that is not the majority of my experience. So I just have to keep pushing through, and one comforting thing is that once I've done that, multiple times in the past, I have been able to see that when I get through it, almost every single time I'll go back and look at it and go, oh, that actually is not that bad. Like it seems horrible while I'm writing it, but I'm just determined to get the words out, so I do. And then I go back and look at it, and I'll be like, oh, maybe it needs some work here and there, but actually it's pretty good. It's just something about, at least for me, I'm not going to speak for every writer, although I have heard a lot of other writers say very similar things. It just can, for whatever reason, be really hard when you're in the middle of it. And there's that whole quote about genius being 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, and I 100% believe that about writing because there are those moments of inspiration, and that is really valuable. Like, I definitely couldn't be a writer without that, but most of it really is just doing it whether you like it or not. And so somehow I always manage to forget just how hard it is when I'm not actually doing it. And then I actually start drafting, and it's like, oh yeah, this is pretty rough. And it's so weird. I don't exactly know why it is that way, but the way to get past it is just to get past it. And it's really a struggle for me.